Well, I think in previous evangelical history, in every generation, there are those who abandon the gospel doctrines, often people who've grown up with them, assuming them, and they then find them confining, or they don't fit with the culture, and there's been a significant drift away from them. So, for example, the classic example of that would be medieval Roman Catholicism, which began to abandon biblical teaching about salvation and developed an entirely different structure of the ministration of grace through the church, which overthrew the doctrine of justification by faith alone. So the church at that point abandoned historical biblical teaching. After the evangelical gospel was recovered through the Reformation and the revivals in the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, we then saw the rise of liberal theology, in which academics began to say that the Bible was not believable. They constructed theories about how the Bible had been put together. They were influenced by Enlightenment philosophy that took the view that miracles were an impossibility, and the result of that was that many people abandoned evangelical faith in favour of a more liberal approach. In the 20th century, as atheism became more dominant, there were even those who sought to develop a kind of Christianity that had sort of no belief in the existence of God, no belief in the existence of the spiritual. So they kind of reinterpreted Christianity as just a form of humanism. So in all of those different eras, people often operating in the academic sphere have cast doubt on the Bible. They've bought into the secular philosophy of the world and have reinterpreted the Christian faith to fit with that secular philosophy, often to devastating effects in the church. Very often the effects aren't felt in the church immediately. So it begins with a small number of academics who are arguing something new and revolutionary. Over time, that becomes the dominant view of the leaders of the church who are trained in that way of thinking. But the members of the church remain faithful, but eventually it leads to the members of the church being influenced by that teaching as well. So often it takes 100 years for the false teaching to filter through all the way from those who were first developing it academically into the life of the church. But when it does filter through to the life of the church, often it destroys the church. So the problem with liberalism is it's effectively saying you don't need Jesus. You don't need the Bible. And of course, in the end, people listen. And so therefore they abandon the church and they become entirely atheist or agnostic, or they turn to another religion or a spirituality. But history is littered with the ways in which people abandon Christian faith. And of course, we shouldn't be surprised by that, because actually that's what the Bible tells us will happen. We're involved in a spiritual battle of sin, and the Bible warns us there will always be false teachers who come into the church who undermine faithful Christian teaching. And that happened even in the early church. Paul was teaching justification by faith alone, but then there were false teachers who were quickly coming along teaching justification by works. We read in the pastoral epistles of false teachers who'd come into the church who were doubting the Bible accounts about Jesus and his resurrection and his divinity. They were arguing that, on a Gnostic view, that you didn't have to marry and that marriage was wrong and certain foods were wrong. So false teaching has come into the church in every generation. And those who started out as faithful Christian leaders and teachers have turned into false teachers who've led others astray.